let's stay heated and talk about Yemen, Will.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah,
so
take that wherever you want.
I really don't have any updates on Yemen, and that's part of the reason, why I want to talk about it on today's show. So, what's happening in Yemen is basically similar to what's been going on for a while, where a lot of the fighting has recently been happening in the Mareb region of that country. They
Yeah,
call it Central Yemen for anybody who's, thinks Central Yemen maybe means right in the middle. It's not really, it's maybe, it's quite a bit closer to the Red Sea than in the middle of the country, but it is about north and south. It's in the middle. And that is an oil rich area. A lot of the oil, flows through either, produced or through pipelines through there. And the
yeah,
Houthis have been threatening to take that city from the Yemeni government for a while. It's one of the key strongholds of the Yemeni government. And there's some fighting in and around there, but it doesn't seem like any side's gaining the upper hand. The reports of both sides killing civilians, either the Houthis with rocket fire, landmine, sniper fire, or the Saudis with airstrikes. Last week it looked like the Houthis were maybe taking a few districts, and the Saudis carried out a few dozen airstrikes in the city. And so that's still going on, fighting there. Then there's, fighting occasionally reported around Hadeda and the city of Taiz, but both of those are still, in their somewhat contested states that they've been in for a while. And so for a large part, the battle lines in Yemen have looked the way they've looked for quite some time, with some fighting going on around Mareb. And so there hasn't been a ton to talk about other than just, children are starving to death. Will, we can't get any reporting of how much is going on. The UN says 400,000 this year, but we could just keep reporting that fact and figure it over again, but it's just depressing, and it's tough to talk about all the time. However, we have been in the Biden administration for 6 months now, and
yeah,
action isn't being taken. Even though Biden said he was ending offensive support for the war, it sure as hell seems like Saudi Arabia is still carrying out offensive war in Yemen. And so, no, not really, Mr. President. That hasn't happened. And part of the reason is there's been absolutely no pressure from Congress. This is one of the things that makes me absolutely despise the Democrats, is that when Trump is in office, well, oh boy, we could pass a War Powers Act that gets the president's desk and demand that he ends the war in Yemen. But when it's a Democratic president, where you could really put some pressure and you say, you will not veto this bill, Mr. President, and you could probably get the Republicans on board to override that veto, well, suddenly there's not a whole lot of interest in it. And
yeah,
Sarah Lazare has a great article where the activists are talking here, and just citing the things that we've talked about for years on the show. Will, how horrific the Saudi bombing campaign is, how horrific the U.S. support for it is, that has continued to go on this whole time. They make the point that we've made, where Trump in 2018 decided that he was going to end the mid-air refueling, but what do you know? The UAE got trained by the U.S. to do the mid-air refueling, so that's really not scaling back the war. And
yeah,
here Biden, says we're scaling back some of the war, but none of the crucial things that allow Saudi Arabia to carry out the blockade, to carry out their air war, we're still doing all that, providing the critical maintenance and everything. And so this was more just to bring it up, Will, because it's been so long since we talked about it on the show, and say that something needs to be done. I love and I hate the hashtag Yemen can't wait, because there literally is right now some kid in Yemen who cannot wait.
yeah,
Where we're looking at, there's children starving to death in that country because of the U.S. bad Saudi war and blockade in that country. And if we don't do something soon, it's just going to be more and more and more in a faster and faster rate. And also with other, things going on in the region, like Ethiopia, where there's now a famine threatening 2 million people. If you have famine in both of those places, it makes it just that much more difficult, because you have that much more demand on the aid, dollars available. I think
right,
Yemen only got half of the money the UN said they thought they would need this year, and that was only the commitments, what people pledged to give, not even what they actually come through on. Historically, Saudi Arabia and the UAE is like, yeah, we'll give $1 billion, and then a few hundred million get there, but it's pretty bad to walk back your aid promises. Anyways,
yeah.
Will, anything else on this before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like, to our audience, like I pride ourselves that we've done a lot of good Yemen coverage for years. The last few months, though, as you kind of been saying, there's not been that much news to report, unfortunately. A lot of it is just the same things ongoing. I mean, I think this Battle of Marib started in February, and so we're talking like 6 months on now. There's just sort of been like a stalemate, it seems. Like, they trade the lines move a little bit here and there from week to week, but there's not a whole lot to really bring to the audience. But yeah, I definitely would like to try to do more there personally. I know I've kind of been slacking on Yemen myself, so I will try to do that.
Right. Well, it's you've definitely noticed a drop off in coverage and discussion about this since Biden's taken office, and now he did come in and say that we're gonna make changes to our policy, but that he hasn't followed through on that is almost worse. Right. That not that Trump doesn't care that there's a humanitarian catastrophe in the country. That's the sign of a really really terrible person. But the person who says it's really bad and I'm going to do something about it, but only says that so he doesn't have to do anything about it. There's something worse about that. Anyways, Will, I think that's where we should wrap up the show for today.